Looks like we are live. Um, might wait a little bit for some people to start coming in. Um, for those of you that don't know, my name is Bryce. I'm the director of operations for the Project Tribute Foundation. Typically, every Monday we try to do a podcast, about updates and stuff like that are going on with the foundation. But I think everybody here, including myself, figured that today, being September 11th, would be a good day to just sit down and spend some time uh, looking back at what happened on September 11th. Um, it's hard. It's a hard day for a lot of people. Almost 3,000 people died that day. And so my goal in doing the live stream today is to share a lot of stories about what happened. I think a lot of people, especially in my generation, maybe don't quite fully appreciate what happened on that day. And I think it can be hard to, not only is it hard to, us- you know, deal with what happened mentally if you weren't there, and I'm sure it's obviously difficult if you were there, but you can't really get a full grasp of exactly what happened. So I think today we're going to kind of go through and listen to some testimonies, not only of first responders, but also of some of the victims that tragically died in the attacks on 9/11. First thing I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through a timeline of what happened. Um, because, like I said, well, actually, you know what? What I'll preface with is I didn't really know how I was going to go about paying a proper tribute to the people that died that day. And then I was scrolling through Instagram this morning, and I heard some of you might know who he is. He's a retired Green Beret, Tim Kennedy. He went on Instagram and he made a tearful kind of announcement about not only telling a story of someone that lost their life on 9/11, but lost their life saving thousands of other people and getting them out of the World Trade Center. Um, so this is what he said on Instagram today. And after he said this, I knew what we needed to do in order to properly pay tribute to those that died that day.
2 years ago, 9/11 happened, September 11th, 2001. I think a lot of people start turning off or tuning out or becoming desensitized to the stories in the posts about what happened. But what happened was horrific. But what also happened was the most extraordinary acts of heroism, maybe in American history. The things that people did on that day to save as many people, like Rick Rescorla, who was the head of security for Morgan Stanley, and he forced people to do these drills that they didn't want to do. And on that day, he was seen walking around with a bullhorn, and he saved 2,500, 3,000 people's lives. Judson Box never knew how his son, Gary, died until years and years later, they find a photo of Gary running through the tunnels to the tower where ultimately he perished trying to save people's lives. This country is amazing because of the people that are in it, and you have to read these stories. Read every single one or as many as you can on this day. 22 years ago.
After he said that, I knew that what we needed to do today was just be able to go through all these different stories, maybe watch a few different videos, and just kind of really understand what happened that day and recognize the sacrifice that people made, not only to save others, but um, just to save the community and come together and help each other out. So first, I'm going to kind of go through a timeline of what happened that day. On September 11th, 2001, a clear, sunny, late summer day, al-Qaeda terrorists aboard 3 hijacked passenger planes carried out coordinated suicide attacks against the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., killing everyone on board the planes and nearly 3,000 people on the ground. A 4th plane crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing all on board, after passengers and crew attempted to wrest control from the hijackers. And here we're going to go through a chronology of the events of 9/11 as they unfolded. 7:59 a.m. American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 with 92 people aboard, takes off from Boston's Logan International Airport en route to Los Angeles. 8:14 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175, a Boeing 767 with 65 people aboard, takes off from Boston. It is also headed to Los Angeles. 8:19 a.m., flight attendants aboard Flight 11 alert ground personnel that the plane has been hijacked. American Airlines notifies the FBI. 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 takes off from Dulles International Airport outside of Washington, D.C. The Boeing 757 is headed to Los Angeles with 64 people aboard. 8:24 a.m., hijacker Mohammed Atta makes the first of two accidental transmissions from Flight 11 to ground control, apparently in an attempt to communicate with the plane's cabin. At 8:40 a.m., air traffic controllers at the Federal Aviation Administration alert North American Aerospace Defense Command, Northeast Air Defense Sector, about the suspected hijacking of Flight 11. In response, needs located at Cape Cod's Otis Air National Guard Base to locate and tail Flight 11. They are not yet in the air when Flight 11 crashes into the North Tower. At 8:40 a.m., air traffic controllers at the Federal Aviation Administration alert North American Aerospace Defense Command Northeast Air Defense Sector about the suspected hijacking of Flight 11. In response, NEAD scrambles two fighter planes located at Cape Cod's Otis Air National Guard Base to locate and tail Flight 11. They are not yet in the air when Flight 11 crashes into the North Tower. I apologize. I think I just read that. 8:41 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93, a Boeing 757 with 44 people aboard, takes off from Newark International Airport en route to San Francisco. It had been scheduled to depart at 8 a.m., around the time of the other hijacked flights. At 8:46 a.m., Mohammed Atta and the other hijackers aboard American Airlines Flight 11 crashed the plane into floors 93 through 99 of the North Tower of the World Trade Center, killing everyone on board and hundreds inside the building. At 8:47 a.m., within seconds, NYPD and FDNY forces dispatch units to the World Trade Center while Port Authority Police Department officers on site begin immediate evacuation of the North Tower. At 8:50 a.m., White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card alerts President George W. Bush that a plane has hit the World Trade Center. The president is visiting an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida at the time. At 9:02 a.m., after initially instructing tenants of the WTC's South Tower to remain in the building, Port Authority officials broadcast orders to evacuate both towers via the public address system. An estimated 10,000 to 14,000 people are already in the process of evacuating. At 9:03 a.m., hijackers crash United Airlines Flight 175 into floors 75 through 85 of the World Trade Center's South Tower, killing everyone on board and hundreds inside the building. Get us up to speed on the screen there. At 9:08 a.m., the FAA bans all takeoffs of flights going to New York City or through the airspace around the city. At 9:21 a.m., the Port Authority closes all bridges and tunnels in the New York City area. At 9:24 a.m., the FAA notifies needs of the suspected hijacking of Flight 77 after some passengers and crew aboard are able to alert family members on the ground. At 9:31 a.m., speaking from Florida, President Bush calls the events in New York City an apparent terrorist attack on our country. At 9:37 a.m., hijackers aboard Flight 77 crash the plane into the western facade of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., killing 59 aboard the plane and 125 military and civilian personnel inside the building. At 9:42 a.m., for the first time in history, the FAA grounds all flights over or bound for the continental United States. Over the next 2.5 hours, some 3,300 commercial flights and 1,200 private planes are guided to land at airports in Canada and the United States. At 9:45 a.m., amid escalating rumors of other attacks, the White House and U.S. Capitol building are evacuated, along with numerous other high-profile buildings, landmarks, and public spaces. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. At 10:07 a.m., after passengers and crew members aboard the hijacked Flight 93 contact friends and family and learn about the attacks in New York and Washington, they mount an attempt to retake the plane. In response, hijackers deliberately crashed the plane into a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, killing all 40 passengers and crew aboard. At 10:28 a.m., the World Trade Center's North Tower collapses, 102 minutes after being struck by Flight 11. At 11 a.m., Mayor Rudolph Giuliani calls for the evacuation of Lower Manhattan south of Canal Street, including more than 1 million residents, workers, and tourists, as efforts continue throughout the afternoon to search for survivors at the WTC site. At 1 p.m., at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, President Bush announces that U.S. military forces are on high alert worldwide. At 2:51 p.m., the U.S. Navy dispatches missile destroyers to New York and Washington, D.C. At 5:20 p.m., the 47-story 7 World Trade Center collapses after burning for hours. The building had been evacuated in the morning, and there are no casualties, though the collapse forces rescue workers to flee for their lives. It is the last of the Twin Towers to fall. At 6:58 p.m., President Bush returns to the White House after stops at military bases in Louisiana and Nebraska. So there were probably some other things that happened that day that perhaps that timeline didn't fully cover. But here's some other events that happened afterward, in the years to follow, after the events were investigated. On July 22nd, 2004, the 9/11 Commission report is released. It includes classified documents, airport security footage of the hijackers, and cockpit voice recordings from United Airlines Flight 93. The report claims all 19 hijackers were members of Al-Qaeda. October 17th, 2006, a federal judge rejects New York City's motion to dismiss lawsuits from first responders who are requesting health payments. January 2nd, 2011, the James Zadroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act of 2010 is signed into law by President Barack Obama. It renews and expands the Victim Compensation Fund. May 2nd, 2011, Osama bin Laden is killed by U.S. Navy SEALs. September 11th, 2011, the World Trade Center Memorial opens to the public on the 10th anniversary of the attacks. Scroll down here.
When something is off, it can feel hard to hide.
I just picked up a golf tip, completely changed my game.
I just picked up a bunch of my hair in the shower this morning.
So we're not going to listen to that. Let's see. All right, moving on. May 10th, 2014, the unidentified remains of people killed in the New York City on 9/11 are returned to the World Trade Center site. May 15th, 2014, the National September 11th Memorial Museum is dedicated in Lower Manhattan. November 3rd, 2014, One World Trade Center officially opens on the site of the Twin Towers. Let's see. Yep. July 29th, 2019, President Donald Trump signs $10 billion into legislation authorizing support for the Victims' Compensation Fund through 2092. August 30th, 2019, a U.S. military court judge in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, sets a trial date of January 11th, 2021 for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other 4 men charged with plotting the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. The trial was later postponed because of the pandemic. We'll kind of move on from there. So like I said earlier, today I just want to kind of go through some stories about, the heroism that occurred that day and the stories of people that were there, and just kind of be able to pay tribute to those people. So let's see. we're going to go to this page here. Oh, here it is. So this is for those that can see it. This is the 9/11 Memorial Museum website. They have this thing called oral histories here, where not only the family members of people that passed away in the terrorist attack, they have the oral histories from them. But particularly, I'd like to play some of the oral histories from the first responders that were involved. This first one here is from Adrienne Walsh. She's a first responder. It says, off duty on the morning of 9/11, firefighter Adrienne Walsh responded to the World Trade Center with the second wave of firefighters to leave the FDNY Ladder Company 20 on Lafayette Street in Soho. In this interview, Lieutenant Walsh recalls the fall of the North Tower. The next clip that we're going to listen to was from Robert Gray, also a first responder. Describe him as an expert in rescuing survivors in collapsed buildings and other high-risk situations. Arlington County, Virginia Captain Robert Gray led the department's technical rescue team in its search for survivors and the recovery of victims at the Pentagon. In this interview, Gray, who was later promoted to battalion chief, describes working the 12-hour night shift at the Pentagon.
And it was obvious on the first floor, once we got all the way to where the plane had hit, that there weren't any survivors in that general area. It was really remarkable because you'd be on the second floor and you'd find a room that was absolutely pristine, more on the third floor than the second, but a room that hadn't been touched. It's surrounded by complete destruction. The ductwork down on the floors, the file cabinets completely ripped apart, and then one room where there's not even but a light layer of smoke on the wall, flags hanging, magazines sitting on the desk. I guess it was how the gas vented through the buildings under pressure and then blew certain areas up and preserved others. So, you just knew, I think we knew intuitively that within the first half hour that we weren't going to find anybody alive. But, you want to be as diligent as you can and just keep searching. I didn't leave the scene until about 12:30 that night. The first couple of days, we might only shore a couple to 3 columns a shift because debris had to all be processed. We had a pile of debris that was airplane parts. There's a lot of things that had some green primer on them, and then all the honeycomb type stuff that's inside the structural sections of the wings. You knew that was an airplane. When it was all said and done, I think there was like 6 tractor trailer loads of just airplane parts. And then you had building parts. They went into a different pile. The goal was to get the building completely shored up. And at the same time, an equal goal and parallel goal was to get the bodies and to get the remains and to get the personal possessions of the people from the building. And we were able to do all that at the same time because, the debris was in some places 7 feet high up against the columns that we had to shore. At the very end, we set up a closing ceremony for the technical rescue team. We got a flag from our uniform section, nailed it up on a 4x8 piece of plywood, put the name of the team, called everybody back that was with TRT. There was over 40 for Arlington, and I don't know how many for Alexandria, probably another 20. And everybody got together. I said a couple words. We had requested one of the clergy from the MDW come over, and he said a prayer. And then we all went over and paid our respects. And it kind of closed the incident out for us.
Let's see. So next, I think we'll listen to a couple of the testimonies from the survivors. And then we'll maybe move on to some YouTube content. And again, for anyone listening, the whole purpose in us going through this is that, I was too young to remember 9/11. At the time, I was probably 2.5, almost 3. But what I remember, at least in the years following that, is, we all made a promise that we wouldn't forget what happened on 9/11. And maybe it's just a social media thing, but I can't help but scroll through, and it seems like a lot of people have forgotten. And kind of like the clip from Tim Kennedy that I shared earlier. I think part of it's that a lot of people want to forget. But we made a promise to the people that died that day and the people that put their lives on the line to save people, that we would not forget. And so that's kind of what we're doing today. We're going through some of the testimonies, not only of first responders, but of survivors, and then also just kind of going through and analyzing everything that happened that day, so that we kind of keep their memory going, and do it justice. So this next one we'll listen to is from Rita Calvo. She was a survivor. Says, a Lower Manhattan resident going to high school on the Upper West Side, Rita Calvo was in class when the students learned that the World Trade Center had been attacked in an oral history recorded for the museum. She recalled anxiously trying to phone her parents to see if their home had been damaged. She also described how she got home that day and her father's efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy in the midst of of unprecedented terror.
Rita Calvo. I grew up in Tribeca. Me and my brother were part of the first Tribeca baby boom. It was a great place to grow up. Literally right in front of our windows was the World Trade Center. My whole life, I really enjoyed the World Trade Center. I enjoyed looking at it. I loved them at night, just seeing the patterns of the windows. And some offices, a whole floor would be lit up, and then other floors would just have a couple of lights here and there. I never, ever thought something would happen. There was no fear whatsoever. I went to my first class. It must have been about 9:15 at this point. And my teacher told us, he's like, 2 planes have crashed in the World Trade Center. They're both passenger airliners. It looks like terrorism. Someone did it on purpose. He said, I'm going to put the radio on. And that was the first I had heard it. There was a woman talking on the radio saying, I'm down at the World Trade Center and both planes. And she stopped. I just hear a roar and screaming. She was like, hold on. I felt my entire body tense up. They're like, it seems that there's been a collapse. And all I could see in my head was that tower falling north directly onto my house. And every single person in my class turned to look at me because I was the only person in there that lived downtown. I called my house. It kept ringing and ringing and ringing. But my dad was there. And everything was okay. The house it didn't fall on the house. It didn't fall on our apartment building. And I just hear him go, oh my God, Rita, we're sending a DD to come get you. They're not going to let you down here if you don't get down here soon. I remember we came down to Greenwich Village, and that was the first time I saw the smoke. And I couldn't believe how big and dark the cloud was, and the sky was so blue behind it. I just went upstairs to my house and wanted to see what it was going to look like off a terrace. Having seen the World Trade Center outside my window for 16 years of my life, I went upstairs, and my dad just told me, he's like, they're both gone. I think the worst part was looking at the news and then looking outside and seeing right outside my window. And my dad handles things very strangely when he gets bad news or when something's, And one of the first things he told me to do is like, you gotta walk the dog. So I took the dog out for a walk, and I'm walking, and people are running towards, uptown. Kids from Stuyvesant walking with their backpacks and people with their briefcases, just turning around, looking back in horror and disbelief. And I'm sitting there with my dog. Second day was the worst because that's when it really hit me. I noticed that there's papers everywhere, pieces of paper with burn marks on them. We were about on Duane Street when a piece of paper hit me in the leg. I picked it up and it said World Trade Center 1, 92nd floor. And it wasn't until I kept running into them that I started thinking, I was like, oh my God, these are from the building. And here's my dad, like, we should go to the supermarket. It was open, except there was no electricity. So everything, it's pitch black dark. Everything's melting onto the floor. It was me, my dad, and my brother, like 8 firefighters who were looking for bottles of water. It was so surreal to be standing in this place shopping by flashlight. When I got home that day, I was covered in dust. Like I could smell it. And apparently, which I only found out later, when my brother and I were still sleeping, my dad had gotten up and gone out and using his New York Post press pass had managed to finagle his way down below Chambers Street where people weren't allowed. And he actually saw the buildings. And I think that really made him realize that it was time to leave. We couldn't stay down here.
All right, we'll listen to a couple more here.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Bruno Delinger. I came to the US when I finished business school in Paris. I got up very early that morning because I was coming back from Europe and I was still jet lagged. I went straight to the World Trade Center. Then I went up the elevator to the 47th floor, went to my office, and I still remember it very clearly. Very little people have heard the sound of plane engines when they're at full strength, full force, flying up in the sky. It's one sound that comes back to me and haunt me on occasions. And then the The building swung for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. We were used to the building swinging, of course, because of, when it was on a stormy day. I was not panicked whatsoever. I was unaware of what's going on. There was no alarm, no call to evacuate the building. And suddenly I felt the urge to go. And I dropped everything and left. It took me 50 minutes to come down from the 47th floor because I left about 15 minutes after the attack. Anyway, so we went down. People were very calm. And I think everybody in the stairwell was like this, determined, but also unconsciously aware that something very dangerous was happening, and remained calm because it was the best thing we had to do. There were 3 flows of people. The regular people like me going down, the people who were coming down from the upper floors and who were very badly injured, no skin, no hair, just burned, and they were walking or carried down by people, helped by people. And then the 3rd flow of people was, of course, the security personnel and fire department people. Now, those people were exhausted. In some of those eyes, you could see that they knew something, that it was dangerous. While there was no panic whatsoever in the stairwell, those people were concentrated, focused on doing that job. And while I was walking down, they were going up to their death, and I was walking down to live. I exited onto the sidewalk that was on Church. I turned around and looked, and I saw the World Trade Center in flames. And those flames were very, very dark orange. The smoke was very, very black against this beautiful sky, and they were big. Suddenly, darkness fell upon us with an unbelievable violence. I looked around a second time. I didn't see the tower. Instead, I heard a sound that today I cannot remember. It was so powerful, such a huge sound that I blocked it. It scared me to death, and I cannot bring it back up to consciousness. And when I said darkness, what was a beautiful day became darker than night. You couldn't see anymore. Even more striking, there was no more sound. Sound didn't go through anymore because the air was so thick that it wasn't vibrating anymore. So after this unbelievable sound of the building collapsing, everything in a few seconds turned to be darker than night with no sound, and you couldn't breathe. I was convinced I was dead because it's so big that your brain cannot process something like this.
That was Bruno Dillinger. We'll listen to one more here from Diane DeFontes. The first person to arrive at her job in a law firm on the 89th floor of the North Tower, Diane DeFontes felt the impact of the hijacked Flight 11 strike the building a few floors above her desk. Within a short while, Frank DeMartini, a longtime employee of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, found DeFontes and a group of people from a nearby office and ushered them into a stairwell where he and a coworker, Pablo Ortiz, had broken through a jammed door. In this part of her oral history, DeFontes recalls her evacuation and the vital assistance provided by DeMartini and Ortiz, who lost their lives helping others that day. I apologize if I botched anybody's name.
I'm Diane DeFontes. I was on the 89th floor of the World Trade Center on September 11th, and I am a survivor. And I remember what an absolutely beautiful day it was. The sky was this beautiful blue. There were very few clouds. When I got into my office, I took one last look out the window and then went to my desk. Then all of a sudden, this bang happened. The bang and being thrown out of my chair and having the door partially open, it like all happened at the same time. And not only that, but the conference room that was on my left, the ceiling fell down and hit the table and cracked the conference room table. So all this noise happened at once. I'm getting up. I said, wow, how the heck did they get a bomb up this high? Because what else could it be? I said, I think I better get my things together. And that's when I put my sneakers back on. And then while I'm getting my things together, the people from MetLife came across, and some of them had blackened faces. They said a plane hit the building. We watched it. We saw it hit the building and our office exploded. I said, oh my God. So when they told me that, I said, all right, let me make another phone call. I called one of my dearest friend and I asked her, turn on the TV and let me know what's happening. And she said, when they showed the building on TV, she said she was trying to count the floors to see where it hit, but she just couldn't do it. I told her, listen, I know that I'm going to make it, but just in case I don't, give your daughter a big kiss for me. I love you and that I'm thinking of you and I'm going to get out of here. Because the part of me wanted to say that because I wanted to believe it. And then shortly after that, Pablo came to our door. All I remember is that yellow helmet, a flashlight, and him standing at the front door and saying, we have to go now. It was Pablo Ortiz. He got us all together. We made a turn and went directly down the hallway. But further down the hallway, at the very last door, was another exit. And he and Mr. DiMartini had broken through that door because when the plane hit the building, it buckled all of the frameworks from the doors and nobody could open doors. I'm so grateful that somebody came to that floor because even if we had gone to that exit, we wouldn't have been able to get out because it was stuck. One of the scariest things was when, I don't remember what floor we were on, but water started coming down the stairs. And it was like a waterfall. And I'm saying, oh God, this feels disgusting because I'm wearing sneakers. I've got long pants on. My pants are getting soaked and they're getting dirty and my feet are like squishing, which is a feeling I really hate. I'm trying to hold on to the banister so I don't fall. And there were people like huddled together because it was dark. And then Tirsa took out her keychain and it had a little light on it. And I said, oh, wow, I have a flashlight in my pocketbook. Too many things were going on and I couldn't think. And then I finally found it and I held it up and people in back, they said, thank you. But I had to turn the corner and there was no more light for them. But I remember the worst time was when the other building went down. The lights flickered. This tremendous roar and the stairway shook and we're holding on to the banister and the building is shaking and no one said a word. It was silence until the noise had stopped. And that's when we were very afraid. I actually started to cry when we're almost out of the building. We're almost downstairs to the main floor. Tirsa and Raphael went down and disappeared. People in back of me went up and disappeared. I'm standing in this little place and I'm by myself. And I don't know if I should run upstairs or run downstairs. And I started to cry because I didn't know what to do. And then someone who was above me said, come up this way, come this way. And I ran up the flight of stairs to meet him. I didn't want to go upstairs because, you know, my heart's telling me that if you're going upstairs, you're going up and you're further away from the exit. But I was wrong. When I walked through that exit to the outside, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I realized what a mess I was when I finally saw myself because when I walked past a store and I turned around and I looked, I didn't recognize myself because my hair was white. My pants were black to the knee. My face was covered with ash. I didn't recognize myself.
All right. Get a couple tabs situated here. And let me know too if for anybody that's listening, if you can hear everything all right. I'd appreciate it. It sounds like it's going through okay, but I just want to make sure. So now I figured we can kind of go through YouTube and kind of find some testimonies. I'm going to try to kind of aim for the ones that are on the news and stuff. So hopefully avoid anything too crazy. But we're going to go ahead and listen to some of these here. Get everything situated here. Okay, there we go. I'll go ahead and leave that there. All right.
In New York City, September the 11th, 2001, brings a busy rush hour, just like any other. Among the commuters driving into work is Frank DiMartini, accompanied by his wife, Nicole. Frank and Nicole live with their 2 children in the Fort Greene area of Brooklyn.
Frank certainly never thought of himself as being special in any way, and he certainly...
For those that may recall, this is the same, I believe it's the same Frank that we were just listening to in that last oral history.
He was a very ordinary person because he could also relate to everyone. He related to the guy that was polishing his shoes just as much as he could relate to his boss.
Frank works on the 88th floor of the World Trade Center's North Tower.
This is great.
As construction manager for the Port Authority, it's his job to help keep over 1.2 million square meters of office complex running smoothly.
I decided to go up to his office and have a cup of coffee with him before work and say hello to his staff. So we just were in his office basically and had a cup of coffee, discussed typical everyday life kind of things. And that's when the plane struck just above us.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, en route from Boston to LA, tears into the North Tower between the 93rd and 99th floors. On the 88th floor, 15 meters below the impact zone, there's confusion, but no panic.
Okay, Jerry? What the hell was that?
I don't know. Yeah. Everybody okay?
Frank and his 30 colleagues have no idea that the building has been hit by a passenger plane hijacked by terrorists.
Stick together.
We all thought that maybe there was an explosion right above us. We didn't really know what had happened.
Stay calm.
One man takes charge of the situation. Construction manager Frank DiMartini.
Grab the radio. The 88th floor.
Frank attempts to manage the situation, but he still doesn't realize how much trouble they're in.
We need to get a floor plan.
Frank, his wife Nicole, and his colleagues are trapped on the 88th floor. As construction manager, no one knows the building better than Frank, and he's determined to find a way out. On the 88th floor, just 5 floors below the impact zone, 30 Port Authority workers are trapped. They still have no idea what's happened. and the route to the only viable emergency stairwell is blocked with debris. Now they're depending on construction manager Frank DiMartini to find a way off the floor. Frank DiMartini has been searching for a way off the floor. He's discovered that 2 of the emergency stairwells are completely blocked, but it seems that the third one, stairwell C, might be passable. Frank returns to the office with the news.
Okay, everybody, I found a way out. I want you all to come out here, take this corridor down towards stairwell C, okay?
When Frank came back, he told us they found a way. We would have to climb over some debris and we would have to just follow him.
Nice and slow, no panic.
If he wasn't there, I think all of us would have just stayed in that office and just hoping that we would get some kind of a rescue.
Without his taking control and organizing our leaving the 88th floor, I don't think that many of us would have survived.
Frank's 30 colleagues and his wife begin to file towards the exit. Nicole is expecting her husband to follow.
Yeah, we've got a large group coming down from the 88th floor, just evacuate.
But Frank hesitates.
Please take it nice and slow.
The last words we exchanged, he said, "I'll be right behind you." I was hoping that he was behind me. I did not really know for sure that he was behind me, but I was certainly hoping.
But then something grabs Frank's attention. Someone is banging on a stairwell door. And the sound seems to be coming from above.
Can you hear that? Go get your ear.
Mac Hanna also worked for Frank on the 88th floor. And like Pablo, he is willing to stay behind and help.
I'd just like to point out how many of us would have seen that and decided to not only stay there, but to ascend higher and help someone who clearly was trying to escape. Clearly he's a very special guy to even consider doing that, because I don't think very many people would.
This is construction manager.
As hundreds of people make their way down to safety, Frank decides to go in the opposite direction. On the 89th floor, the lives of Rick, Thomas, and over 20 other people hang in the balance. Little do they realize that Frank DiMartini, Pablo Ortiz, and Mac Hanna are already heading their way. Frank, Pablo, and Mac have heard their cries and are already climbing the stairs towards them. As the seconds tick away, they wrestle with the door, but it won't budge.
Jam.
Frank realizes that there might be another way to open the door.
Have you got a crowbar? In the office. Okay, great. Good.
The walls around the door aren't built of concrete or steel, but sheetrock. If the door won't give, maybe the wall will. Breaking through the sheetrock frees the jammed door. They're finally able to begin the 300-meter descent to ground level.
15 to 20 people.
Thanks to Frank, Pablo, and Mac, another group of people has been given a chance of survival.
Going through the door, and this fellow whom I've since learned was Frank DiMartini, I just gave him a thanks. And he just nodded in, "You're welcome." And I just continued down the stairs.
Just the last.
And that was the last I saw of the fella.
There's one simple hearing hack anyone can use to improve their hearing almost overnight.
All right, so it looks like in this video here, we're going to talk about a Vietnam vet who saved 2,700 lives on 9/11. Name is Rick Rescorla. Sorry, I can't read that. Might be Rick Rescorla.
This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by Bill Van Scoyoc, who is not a veteran of the United States military, but he's here to tell us about a very special one named Rick Rescorla. He's also here to tell us about his role in the harrowing events of 9/11 inside the World Trade Center. And Rick, thanks very much for being with us.
Hey, Greg, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And honestly, I'm just so appreciative of the fact that we get to speak of Rick and his heroism and what he did on 9/11.
Where were you born and raised?
So I was born and raised in Yonkers, New York, Westchester County, and Yonkers is about 20 minutes outside of Manhattan. And
I think this one's about 33 minutes long. I think I'm going to try to find a different one here. Let's see.
Saturday marks 20 years since 9/11, and this was one of the most powerful stories of heroism from that day.
A group of firefighters somehow survived inside the collapsed World Trade Center for 4 hours and managed to save a woman's life. CBS 4's Michael George sat down with one of those firefighters to look back at what happened that morning.
Retired FDNY Lieutenant Matt Komorowski's memories of September 11th are always close.
This was my helmet on the day of 9/11.
Why is it important for you to have this here in your home?
It reminds me of the firemen that we lost that day. It reminds me of all the lives we lost that day.
20 years ago, he and the other members of Ladder Company 6 went into the World Trade Center's North Tower searching for survivors, trying to climb more than 90 flights of stairs as debris fell around them.
My captain turned to us and said, "Firemen will die today." And that was a very poignant moment for all of us.
When the South Tower collapsed, Ladder Company 6 got the order to evacuate. That's when they spotted Josephine Harris, who needed help getting down the stairs.
We were taking her down, and at about the 8th floor, our building came down.
The North Tower collapsed on top of them.
I immediately screamed to the guys in front of us to move.
What happened next almost defies explanation. The entire building around them was destroyed, but Stairwell B, the spot where they were assisting Josephine, remained standing.
Where she stopped turned out to be the spot we needed to be.
They spent 4 hours trapped in the rubble, but all 6 men on the crew and Josephine made it out alive.
There were so many other firemen that day that were doing exactly what we were doing. Why we survived, we have no idea.
Josephine, who worked as a bookkeeper for the Port Authority, stayed close with Matt and the other firefighters who saved her.
We had a special bond with her. She was our guardian angel. If she had continued down to the lobby and then our building came down, we wouldn't be around.
In 2011, Ladder Company 6 served as pallbearers when Josephine passed away, carrying her one last time. Michael George, CBS News, New York.
Komorowski credits his wife, his children, and therapists for helping him deal with his PTSD after 9/11. During his career, he became a mentor for many young firefighters. And where were you on September 11, 2001? For many of us, it's not a difficult question to answer.
So for anybody just tuning in, Bryce with the Project Tribute Foundation, we're just here kind of going through stories of the heroism that occurred on 9/11 and some of the both heroic and tragic stories of people that happened that day. Biggest thing, like I've said from the beginning of the podcast today, is that I think a lot of people like I was saying, I scroll through social media, and the one thing that we promised everyone that died on 9/11 is that we would never forget. And looking, kind of just at what people are posting. That's not to say that, the people aren't in their thoughts, but, I think people find that other things are more important when, we promised these people that we wouldn't forget what happened. So I think it's important, especially to show people of my generation who were either extremely young or not even born yet, to kind of go through and analyze exactly what happened and kind of be able to digest some of the things that happened so that, we can understand them, and then we can understand the sacrifice that our first responders made that day, as well as so many other people who attempted to help people escape from the towers, the Pentagon, the brave people that stood up and fought the terrorists on the plane, and which ended up crashing in a field in Pennsylvania. There's just so much heroism and unfortunately so much tragedy as well. So yeah, right now we're just going through some of the stories and just remembering what happened and some of the names of the heroes involved. So let's see if we can find another one here. Okay. So I guess kind of backtracking, let's we're gonna listen to this video here. It's of some of the air traffic control conversations.
Flight attendants, even top military personnel.
And is put into action, there's a chilling account of the chaos unfolding on 9/11.
A time when all of us were completely caught off guard.
The whole building just came apart. Holy smokes.
Air traffic controllers, pilots, flight attendants, even top military personnel coming to grips with the fact our country was under attack. ABC 15's Christopher Sine going through these new audio tapes tonight.
And Chris, tough to imagine how anybody keeps calm in something like this.
It was absolutely chilling as I was listening to these tapes today. They were put together by Rutgers University, and you can even hear the voice of hijackers in these tapes. And before we play them for you, we want to let you know the audio can be intense, and you'll also see powerful images from the moments before and after the 9/11 attacks.
Number 3 in the back, the cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class. And I think there's mates that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked.
I just dropped 800 feet in like one sweep. That's another situation. What kind of airplane is that? Can you guys tell? I don't know. I'll read it out in a minute.
I am monitoring a call in which Flight 11, the flight attendant is advising our reps that the pilot, everyone's been stabbed.
United 93. Please sit down. Keep remaining sitting. We have a ball board. Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll endanger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet. All right, Boston Center, TMU. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need you guys to. We need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out. Is this real world or exercise? No, this is not an exercise, not a test. A lot of smoke in lower Manhattan. Another one just hit the building. Wow. Wow. Another one hit it hard.
I think there was an important thing to point out there is hindsight is 2020, but when this is all starting to happen, nobody knew what was going on. Obviously we do now. But if you even look back at, when the first plane hit the tower, a lot of people thought that maybe it could have just been an accident. Nobody was necessarily thinking that it was a terrorist attack. It wasn't until that second plane, like you can see in the photo there, hit the towers that people really started to put the pieces together that this was a concerted effort to take innocent lives.
Another one just hit the World Trade. The whole building just came apart. Minnesota Tower, I have an active air defense scramble, F-15s climbing to flight level 290.
All aircraft on the ground for a national emergency.
The region commander has declared that we can shoot down aircraft that do not respond to our direction. Copy that? You read that from the Vice President, right? Vice President has cleared.
United 9-3, have you got information on that yet?
Yeah, he's down.
He's down?
Yes.
When did he land? Because we have confirmation.
He did not land.
Oh, he's down?
Yeah,
Down?
somewhere up northeast of Camp David.
And a lot of the voices on those tapes were pilots watching everything unfold. And tonight I spoke with a retired airline captain right here in the Valley, and he says those pilots providing the key details to air traffic controllers is part of their training.
Whether it's describe what you see, whether it's, responding to somebody attacking you, or whatever the dilemma is, or whatever's presented to you, you just keep doing. You're very task oriented.
He also tells me many of the pilots in this case knew the radios were crowded, therefore only passing the critical information along and also being good witnesses while these decisions were made on the ground. And Steve and Katie, I mean, really hats off to them. It's amazing how focused they were watching and seeing these incidents unfold, the planes hitting the building, a plane crashing in the field, just devastating.
Yeah, just a testament to their training, certainly.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Happening right now.
Roofers are furious.
I'm going to take a break from YouTube there. And I'm going to go ahead and read some stories of some heroes that day here. Just give me a second to pull them up here. Okay. This particular story is about a man named Rick Rescorla, a hero of 9/11. I found this article it's called Drive Through History. And I'm just going to go ahead and read through it and kind of explain, or I won't explain, the article will explain what he did that day. There were a number of stories of courage, service, and sacrifice on 9/11, especially with the multiple accounts of first responders running into the World Trade Center buildings while others were running out. One such story involved a Vietnam War hero named Rick Rescorla. Rick worked as a security officer for Morgan Stanley, the largest tenant in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. His prior experience in military intelligence made him concerned about vulnerabilities at the World Trade Center complex. Beginning in 1997, Rick delivered numerous reports about his security concerns, including possible attacks by planes being crashed into the buildings. He even suggested that Morgan Stanley leave New York City and relocate to New Jersey, where it was safer and cheaper. The company wasn't in a position to leave the city, so Rick turned to training the employees in safety and evacuation drills instead. Jump forward a few years to the fateful morning of September 11th, 2001. It was 8:46 a.m. when the North Tower of the World Trade Center was struck by American Airlines Flight 11. Rick Rescorla was in his office on the 44th floor of the South Tower and heard the explosion. He could see the smoke from his window. Shortly after the impact, the Port Authority made an announcement over the building's PA system, urging people to stay where they were and remain calm. Rick knew different. Using a bullhorn, walkie-talkie, and cell phone, he immediately went to work getting people to evacuate down the stairwells from all 20 floors occupied by Morgan Stanley. He continued tirelessly even after he felt the impact of the United Airlines Flight 175 hitting their tower at 9:03 a.m. Many people were in full panic mode, but Rick kept them calm, even singing songs as they scrambled down the stairwells. In the midst of the chaos, Rick found time to call his wife, Susan. He told her, "Stop crying. I have to get these people out safely. If something were to happen to me, I want you to know I've never been happier. You made my life." After evacuating over 2,500 Morgan Stanley employees, Rick went back into the South Tower to make sure everyone was out. A colleague saw him and told him he should evacuate like everyone else. Rick replied, "As soon as I make sure everyone else is out." Rick Rescorla was last seen on the 10th floor heading up. The South Tower collapsed shortly after that at 9:59 a.m. Rick's remains were never found, and he was declared dead 3 weeks later. The country first learned about Rick's heroic acts about 6 weeks after the attacks in a Washington Post article by Michael Grunwald entitled A Tower of Courage. In the end, Rick Rescorla was credited with saving 2,687 lives on 9/11. Only 13 Morgan Stanley employees didn't make it out. On September 11th, 2019, Rick received the Presidential Citizens Medal from President Donald Trump, the second highest civilian award in the United States. The medal was presented to his wife, Susan, at a White House ceremony. Rick Rescorla was a true hero to thousands of families who welcomed their loved ones home on 9/11. All right. Sorry, you kind of end up at a loss for words after reading some of that. So let's see. One other story we'll talk about here took place at the Pentagon involving, looks like Colonel Marilyn Wills. And a few other people, it looks like here. Let's see. For many, images of the towers in New York crumbling into a mountain of debris or the sight of black smoke billowing from the Pentagon, a symbol of America's military strength, may conjure up memories like it was yesterday, especially for those who lived every minute of the attack. Although 9/11 is remembered for the tragic events that occurred, it all started like any other Tuesday morning at the Pentagon, survivors told reporters Wednesday. The typical hustle and bustle was well underway. Over 23,000 service members and civilians quickly filled up the parking lots, hurried throughout corridors and halls, checked schedules, planned meetings, and settled into the desks spread out across 3.7 million square feet of office space. One of those service members, retired Colonel Marilyn Wills, was among the many soldiers inside the building that September morning. Despite living 16 miles from work, Wills was on the road before the sun was up. It was a rushed morning for her. In a break-in tradition, Wills didn't get to pray with her family or see her two daughters off to school. Quote, "You know, in the Army, if you're on time, you're late," she said during a media event. Quote, "So I got there at least 15 minutes early. It's always cold in the building to me, so I went back to my office on the second floor and grabbed my Army sweater." Around this time, Mark Lewis, who is currently the senior official performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, was also starting his day. In those days, Lewis was an Army colonel and the director of plans and resources for the Army G1. With year-end resources and manpower on his mind, then Colonel Lewis hoped to meet with Lieutenant General Timothy Maude, the Army Deputy Chief of Staff or of Personnel. But according to Lewis, Debbie Ramsar, Maude's secretary, said the general was on a tight schedule but would try to fit Lewis and colleague in later that morning. This was around 9:15 a.m., he said. With the general backed up with work, Lewis and he left the G1's office. As Lewis walked down a hallway, the building jolted. Fumes of jet fuel filled the corridor. It was American Airlines Flight 77, a jetliner hijacked by 5 Saudi men affiliated with Al-Qaeda. It was deliberately crashed into the Pentagon. Moments later, people were running around, Lewis said. They were coming downstairs, which was also on fire, grabbing people on the neck, but they weren't particularly shrieking or crying that I can remember. Instead, they were trying to find a way to safety. Many were directed to the end of the corridor 4, where it connects to the A ring of the building, which just happened to be my office, Lewis said. The office space Lewis worked in had a double door that opened to the A ring and then led outside of the Pentagon. He helped wedge the doors open and started shoving people through those offices that could get out of the 4 ring of corridor 4 and into A ring, he said. Then, of course, away from the fire and out of the building. One of Lewis's coworkers, Roy Wallace, the senior civilian and principal advisor for the Army G1, was nearby. Wallace had left a meeting with Maude and was roughly 50 feet away from the American Airlines 77's path of destruction when it hit. Within moments, fire pulled the oxygen from the room he was standing in, he said. The Pentagon attack killed everyone on board, the aircraft, and 125 people inside the building, including Ramsar and Maud and 27 other members of the Army G1. The general would be the highest-ranking service member killed during the September 11 attacks, Lieutenant General Maud was the quintessential general in my mind, Lewis said. He was smart, he was focused, he was personable, caring, and extremely competent. Meanwhile, the blast sent Wills flying across a conference table. The room she was in went dark, but she could picture the room in her mind, she said. The Army officer crawled through the darkness to a nearby door, but when she reached for the handle, it was too hot, she said. Wills turned and crawled toward another door, the one she entered, unaware people were following her. When she realized she was being followed, she asked, "Who is this? Talk to me. Who is this?" It was one of her coworkers, Lois Stevens. They continued crawling through smoke and flames, down hallways and under cubicles. Everything was destroyed, Wills said. Behind Lois, a line of coworkers followed Wills as she navigated through the darkness. I could see nothing, Wills said. I could not even see my hand if I touched my nose. At one point, Stevens wanted to give up. The heat was melting her clothes onto her skin. The black smoke was filling all their lungs, and according to Wills, Stevens said she could not go on. The colonel replied, "Oh, yes, you can. Just get on my back and I'll carry you," she said. Eventually, they made it out of the mayhem through a window. For her actions, she would receive the Soldier's Medal and a Purple Heart. Although she helped save lives, including Stevens, some did not survive. We lost so many that day, Wills said. They were my friends. Around this time, Jerry Kitzhaber, who now serves as Deputy Principal to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs for Training, Readiness, and Mobilization, witnessed the blast from his office window. By a twist of fate, he discussed the unfolding events in New York City with his wife, which delayed him from attending a scheduled meeting inside the Pentagon directly hit by the American Airlines 77, he said. Kitzhaber made his way to the Pentagon South parking lot and was still trying to process what had happened. Outside, he talked to a truck delivery driver who witnessed everything. The driver said, "I was here just to deliver my load when I heard a noise and looked up and I saw the plane coming in," Kitzhaber told reporters. Then he said the pilot just gunned it. The next thing he said took us by surprise. He said he could see the people in the windows of the airplane as it came in. As Kitzhaber processed the news, the other survivors made their way outside the Pentagon. He said watching the F-16 fighter jets, screaming across the skies assured him no other planes would fall from the sky. The survivors shared their memories of that day for multiple reasons, but they agreed it was an opportunity to honor colleagues lost on that day. They were individuals who were serving their country through service, and they were supporting their families in the most honorable way, Lewis said. They are in their place in history. So for anybody just tuning in, we're kind of going through and just remembering what happened on September 11th. And most importantly, we're going through the stories of survivors, their stories about the heroics that happened that day, who performed them, and kind of just getting a better idea of what happened. So let's see. We'll find another one here. Just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So I think we're going to check this one out. This says this is Joe Torrio, and the title of the video is "The September 11th Firefighter Who Never Gave Up," inspirational speech. Start from the beginning here. Let me share the screen as well. Sorry, guys. This is my first time operating all this stuff. Okay. also, I'll add too, if any of you have any stories that I'm missing, or know of a name that you'd like me to look up, I would be happy to do that. And if it helps share their story or share a story of somebody who, any of the heroes of 9/11, let's see, just any unique stories, even stories from survivors or anything like that. Feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'll try to keep an eye on that and share any stories that we might miss. But here is Joe Torrio.
I was declared dead for 3 days. When the South Tower came down, I was right underneath it, and I realized I had about 10 seconds left to live. Slightly more than 12 years ago, on September 11, 2001, it was a day that it seemed the world stood still for a full day in all 198 countries of Earth.
An incredible plane crash into the World Trade Center.
We have serious news of a major possible air crash in the United States.
And I was in the middle of it in New York City. My firehouse was right across the street where I began my career in 1980. I was under the second jet. It came right over my head when United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower 17 minutes after the North Tower. I was declared dead for 3 days. When the South Tower came down, I was right underneath it, and I realized I had about 10 seconds left to live. And all I was afraid of was that my body would never be found or identified. And I started running, but I never made it. The South Tower came down. All my ribs were broken. My arm was snapped in half. My shoulders were torn off. My back was crushed, and I was bleeding internally. And I'm buried underneath the South Tower with all these other people. They were screaming at the top of their lungs. We couldn't see each other. We were all pinned under steel and concrete, and we were suffocating. And I begged God to take my life. I couldn't live in this pain. And a few minutes later, we were all in the middle of all these fires. And then the screams of those people turned into cries, cries turned into whimpers, and whimpers turned into silence. And one by one, they had all died. I'll never know them. We couldn't see each other, and I was still breathing. And then at that point, people came and they were digging, and they found me. And they got me on a boat. And on the boat, they were intending to take me across the river to New Jersey to a hospital because I had to get there immediately if they were going to save me. And then a half hour later, the North Tower fell, and it fell on top of the boat, and I got buried in the engine room of the boat all alone. And once again, I'm suffocating. I can't breathe, and I'm in tremendous pain for almost an hour until they found me again, buried in the engine room. And then the boat was taken across the river to a hospital in New Jersey. But nobody thought about looking in hospitals in other states. And that's where I ended up, in New Jersey, a hospital called Jersey City Trauma Center. And for 3 days, I was declared missing because I was misidentified. You see, boys and girls, this all leads up to the most interesting part of the story. You see, boys and girls, I started my career in the firehouse across the street from the World Trade Center, Engine Company 10. I started my career there in 1980 when that firehouse opened. And I stood there for 16 years until I was promoted to lieutenant on September 5th, 1996. They asked me to work in their Office of Fire Safety Education. And boys and girls, 8 months into that assignment, I was named the director of the whole program. And then at that point, I get a call from Fisher-Price Toys. I figured they got a wrong phone number. What do you want? This is, we want to run something by you might be interested in. Well, what is it? They wanted a New York City firefighter to be their new rescue hero. And as I was telling them what a firefighter looks like with his bunker gear, his tools, his equipment, his air mask, and they want to have a big press conference in New York City. They want to introduce this new rescue hero. Well, they were so excited. They said, when can we do it? And I'm brainstorming in the meeting. I says, 911 is the emergency phone number in New York City. Why don't we have a 911 day in New York? This was the new rescue hero being introduced on September 11, 2001 at 9 o'clock in the morning when the first jet struck the tower. On my way to the press conference, I saw the tower fully engulfed with flames, and I had to make a big decision. What do I do? Do I go to the press conference for Billy Blazes, which didn't happen anyway, or do I make my way to my old firehouse across the street from the Twin Towers? And that's what I did. Boys and girls, I didn't have to be there that day. I was in a dress uniform. I took my uniform off and borrowed a set of firefighting gear. And in that rescue effort, I was buried. And by the time the sun went down on the evening of September 11th, 2001, 344 firefighters were declared dead. 3 days later, one was found alive in another state, in a hospital, in an operating room, and that was me. And boys and girls, Billy Blazers would come to represent those 343 heroes that I worked with who made the supreme sacrifice of life. Let this day ignite you more than anything could ever ignite you. Billy Blazers, a New York City firefighter rescue hero, is the only rescue hero that represents real people, and that's not me. It was the other 343 firefighters who I get the honor of telling their story. And the marvel of the story, as you're gonna see, life changes. Life takes you down roads you didn't know were meant for you. Life takes you down roads that offer challenges and changes all of us in so many different ways. And that's why, boys and girls, all through life, you gotta be resilient like a palm tree. It's important to keep your eyes open and your hearts open.
We're firefighters. We're going to just see if we can help some people out here. That's 9 truck, one of the first to come from this.
Man, I've got no words after that. All right, let's see if we can't find another one here.
First plane that crashed into the.
Do you own your home and open?
I'm good at clicking the wrong.
First plane that crashed into the World Trade Center. Her name was Betty Ong, and today KTVU's Amber Lee talked with her brother about the family's sadness and pride 20 years later.
Cypress Lawn Memorial Park in Colma offers solace and solitude for Harry Ong when he comes to honor his sister Betty Ong. She was the flight attendant on American Airlines Flight 11, credited with being the first person to alert authorities to the deadly hijackings that took place September 11th, 2001.
I just have that feeling that I just wasn't there for her. It's just really hard to feel otherwise.
Ong says his sister's last words during a phone call to report the hijacking reflects her courage and poise.
The cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class. And I think there's mace that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked.
Betty remained on the phone for 23 minutes, providing critical information until the plane crashed into the World Trade Center. The 9/11 Commission declared her a national hero.
Our number 1 has been stabbed, and our 5 has been stabbed. Can anybody get up to the cockpit? Can anybody get up to the cockpit? We can't even get into the cockpit. We don't know who's up there.
Her last words were, "Pray for us."
20 years has gone by, but I also have to say that it's been 20 years of anguish.
Anguish that hasn't diminished. Ong says for years after the attacks, their father refused to give up hope that Betty was alive until he died in 2007.
Every single night, he'd be glued to the television and just saying that, the return of Betty is come about and that she's safe. And he'd be just sitting there crying.
Ong says Betty had volunteered to work that flight to earn some extra money for a trip with her sisters.
And here we are, the 4 of us, Betty, myself, and my parents.
She was the youngest of 4 in a tight-knit family.
Betty Ong was born and raised in San Francisco, Chinatown. She used to play here at the Chinese Recreation Center. In 2012, the city renamed the center in her honor.
The Betty Ann Ong Chinese Recreation Center.
The spirit of Betty Ann Ong is one of joy and perseverance.
Community leader Reverend Norman Fong, a family friend, led the effort to rename the center to honor the hometown hero, strength in the face of adversity.
I love the Betty Ann Ong story, and I hope the kids and everybody appreciate that. And those kids today, who knows, one of them could be a hero or a heroine for the future.
Ong says their family had modest means. Betty wanted to help people and see the world. Being a flight attendant was her dream.
It's just very peaceful.
The family has a niche at Cypress filled with items Betty loved.
And I just remember her, and I remember her every day, and think about her and what happened to her. And my thought would be, we just never had a chance to say goodbye.
The family forever changed on September 11th, 2001.
It's very difficult to move forward. It's just not easy.
In coma, Amber Lee, KTVU, Fox 2 News.
And that's just one story, folks, of I think just under 3,000.
This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there.
A plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City.
We don't know anything more than that. We don't know if it was a commercial aircraft.
Oh my God, another plane has just hit another building, flew right into the middle of it.
The building's exploding right now. You got people running up the street.
Sean, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. I just wanted you to know that I love you always.
I think we have a terrorist act of proportions that we cannot begin to imagine at this juncture.
If a popular novelist sat down and wrote a novel, people wouldn't buy this book because it would be so outrageous. This could never happen.
I don't know what to tell young people about that day. I know when I die, first thing I'm going to ask St. Peter is like, hey, what happened? How did this happen? Because I still have questions. It was my day off. It was a beautiful day, really beautiful blue skies.
It was going to be the morning of the mayoral primaries. They switched me to do election duty that day.
Like every other morning, we were sitting around the table just going over what was going on with the kids, with the family.
I was in my bathroom taking a shower, and I had a window that faced south, and I heard what I thought was an explosion.
At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the World Trade Center North Tower, Building 1. It was one of 4 planes hijacked by 19 al-Qaeda terrorists that day. At first, it seemed a tragic accident, an airplane off course.
As I'm watching this, trying to figure out, do I have to go to work? The second plane hit, and I saw it on TV. And that was it.
And all I seen was this huge fireball coming out of Tower 2, the South Tower. And for a second, I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe just the building blew up.
I ran downstairs, and I'm looking south, and both towers are on fire. And it was stunning.
With the second catastrophic strike, it became clear that the country was under attack. New York City mounted its largest rescue effort in history, dispatching more than 2,000 firefighters, medical workers, and police officers to Lower Manhattan.
It was a little hard getting through the streets because there was debris all over. So they had to come out of the building from the plane hitting it.
You got to remember, the North Tower is fully engulfed. It's people are jumping out of the windows, and you can hear them hitting the deck.
There was these popping sounds going off. We realized it was people that were either jumping off the building or were falling out of the building.
I did not look. I was not going to look. I'm very protective of my psyche. I only need to see what I need to see in situations like this. But you couldn't close your ears.
Rescue workers rushed in to help the more than 16,000 people still inside, putting their own lives on the line. officers Bill Biuri and Mark DeMarco and their team entered the North Tower, Tower 1.
We ended up at stairwell C, and we started our climb up.
We're running into other people. I said, just follow the wall down. When you get outside, I said, try not to panic. I said, but run. I said, get away from the side as fast as you can. And all of a sudden, the lights went out. The building went dark. Ceiling panels were falling down.
It sounded like a freight train going by.
And the whole place was shaking like an earthquake. With this, our radio started getting very active.
15 floors down from the top. It looks like it's totally glowing red. On the inside, it's inevitable because I don't think this has too much longer to go.
At 9:59 a.m., the 110-story South Tower, Tower 2, crashed down in just 10 seconds.
And that's when a little bit of shock started setting in, because we knew what these buildings looked like. We knew how long it took them to put them up. And for something like that to come down in a matter of seconds, it was just mind-boggling. You couldn't wrap your head around it. One of the officers that was outside, he put over the radio, he said, everybody who was in Tower 1, evacuated immediately. Get the hell out of there.
DeMarco and Biuri, along with Sergeant Michael Curtin and Officer John Delara, saved civilians from certain death, ushering them from the stairway and lobby. The men then made their way from the North Tower to the adjacent building number 6. There, they met McNally and his partner Claude Danny Richards. Then, only moments later,
one plane colliding with one twin tower. Oh my God.
It's collapsing. It's collapsing. Roll your left. Watch out. It's collapsing. I hear that the North Tower is coming down.
Oh my God.
And we put our heads down and we held on to each other and we tried to become as small as we possibly could.
And I just laid there, and I remember saying goodbye to my wife and kids.
I remember seeing all 4 of my kids, one after another.
I had time to get out one prayer, and it was, dear God, if you're going to take me, please make it fast. You know, that's how scared I was. I was terrified.
I remember saying to myself, I said, is this death? Is this what death is?
And I was waiting for like a piece of steel to come through my back and out my chest or something.
the 110-story North Tower landed on Building 6, blasting a crater through it, only a few feet from where McNally, Biuri, and DeMarco were huddled.
You've probably seen the large cloud dust. Well, we were in it. I had a respirator, and that became very clogged very quickly, and I couldn't breathe. And you start really panicking when you can't breathe. All of a sudden, it was silent, and you're like, wow, I survived.
I started moving my fingers and my toes, and I said, I guess that's a good sign. I figured I got my limbs, and I figured I was alive.
I don't know how long we were there or how long we were in that spot. But we ended up getting up and we all met up.
Visibility was still horrible. Little patches of fire were breaking out. And I said to myself, the building collapse didn't kill me. I said, I'm going to burn to death. Bill Biuri yells out, he goes, I think I found a way out. I think there's a hole over here, a hole in the building.
And we got this conga line, and we're going to try to get out. It was Mark DeMarco, me, and Billy behind me. You could still see our handprints on the wall as we were guiding ourselves blindly.
We were able to climb out the windows out to the outside mezzanine level, which was facing West Street. The bridge was all collapsed. Everything was dead silent. No cars, no birds, nothing.
McNally, Biuri, and DeMarco searched in vain for 3 NYPD officers who moments before had been right there with them. A search that would continue for months on end.
They couldn't find Mike Curtin, John Delara, or Danny Richards. And we didn't find them until the following spring. They were buried under the sheer weight of the World Trade Center. And they couldn't have been more than 20 feet behind us when the tower came down. And that was the focus of the rest of my days there, was making sure that people knew exactly where I thought these guys were, you know, so that we could recover their bodies.
And to this day, I don't understand why I'm still here. There's a guiltiness about it. Because There's a lot of them. They were more talented. They're just better people than me. They didn't make it. I was able to come home. I was able to see my family. I was able to see my kids grow up.
I'm fortunate. I'm lucky. You know, I thank God that I'm still breathing, but I inhaled a lot of stuff. And, you know, sometimes that I don't think about it, but I know that there might be a ticking time bomb in my chest, you know?
To this day, only 60% of the victims have been identified, most only through traces of DNA, leaving more than 1,000 families without any remains of their loved ones to bury and mourn.
I miss my friends, even the ones who survived. They're not the same. There's a lot of guys who are coming down sick with cancers that are horrific.
I think about 9/11 every day. I mean, it's not. It doesn't consume me where I feel I need to go see a shrink or seek help somewhere. I just don't ever want to forget it. I don't forget it. I wear a memorial bracelet with the guys who perished that day. Sergeant John Coughlin, Sergeant Michael Curtin, Sergeant Rodney Gillis, Detective Joseph Vigiano, Police Officer John DeLara, Police Officer Vincent Dance.
NYPD, issue Truck 7, 9/11/01. And there's only been one time that this hasn't been on my arm. In 2013, I had open heart surgery.
What I always try to tell people about that day is that there were so many heroes that day, so many heroes, helping each other down the stairs and out into the lobbies. And it was a day when we needed heroes, and many of them showed up. Did we get everything right? Probably not. Did we do the best we could? Yeah.
Okay, let's see.
You know, a huge testimony for the Jewish people, and it's fairly well known that in the early
For those that may not have had the chance to read it, this is just a small tribute, I believe, to the heroes of Flight 93.
This is the Flight 93 National Memorial, located at the site of the crash of United Airlines Flight 93. Until that fateful day, this was just a regular Pennsylvania field, about 2 miles north of Shanksville and about 60 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. A temporary memorial to the 40 heroes was established soon after the crash, and the first phase of the
John, I'll look up that story next.
permanent memorial was dedicated 10 years later on September 10th, 2011. This visitor center sits on a hill overlooking the crash site and the white marble wall of names below. Here's the courageous account of what unfolded in the skies above me on September 11th, 2001. United Flight 93 was scheduled to depart at 8 a.m. from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, California. However, the Boeing 757 was delayed 42 minutes due to runway traffic. By the time Flight 93 took off and was heading west over Pennsylvania, 3 other planes had already crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. At 9:28 a.m., air traffic control heard screams in Flight 93's cockpit. Moments later, terrorists took over the controls and told its passengers, "Remain sitting. We have a bomb on board." The passengers were herded to the back section, and within a few minutes, the plane changed course and was heading for Washington, D.C. Several of the passengers made phone calls to loved ones who informed them about what was happening with the other terrorist hijackings. One of the passengers, Todd Beamer, tried to place a credit card call through the phone on the back of the seat in front of him, but he was routed to a customer service supervisor, Lisa Jefferson. With FBI agents listening, Beamer informed Jefferson that hijackers had taken over Flight 93 and that one passenger had been killed. He also shared that 2 of the hijackers had knives and that one appeared to have a bomb strapped around his waist. When the hijackers suddenly veered the plane south, the passengers knew they had to do something. According to cell phone conversations, Beamer and 3 other men formed a plan to take the plane back from the hijackers. The other passengers and crew agreed to the plan as it was quietly relayed up the aisle. They decided to storm the cockpit. But first, Todd Beamer recited the Lord's Prayer and the 23rd Psalm, and the other passengers joined in. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Todd Beamer then asked Lisa Jefferson, "If I don't make it, please call my family. Let them know how much I love them." After this, Jefferson heard Beamer clearly shout, "Are you ready? Okay, let's roll." These were Beamer's last words. The plane's voice data recorder later revealed pounding and crashing sounds against the cockpit door and shouts and screams in English. "Let's get them." The terrorist is heard shouting in Arabic, "Allahu Akbar." At just past 10 in the morning, Flight 93 crashed into this empty field at 580 miles per hour. Everyone on board was killed. It turns out the plane was only 20 minutes away from its suspected target, the White House or the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. As sad as that day was, this was a true story of faith, courage, and heroism. A story that reveals the greatness of the American spirit.
Man, that hit hard when he read that Bible verse about lying in green pastures. look up a story here. Mr. John Beckloff has shared in the comments here. See if I can't find. Let's see, John, if you're watching, I'm not sure if any of these look familiar. Looks like there's a couple different stories here, but I'll pick one of them and we'll see if that's it. Let's see.
In our national lead, September 11th, 2001. Tomorrow marks 20 years since that single day changed so many lives forever. That day started the war on terror when then President George W. Bush vowed to defeat every terrorist group of global reach. That day changed air travel forever.
Okay, John, I see your comment. Marines set up a mobile daycare outside the Pentagon. This looks like it might be related, so we'll go ahead and listen to it. And if it's not it, I'll look for something else.
After 19 hijackers took over cockpits and sent commercial planes on suicide missions. And that day changed, well, so many families, including my next two guests. Second Lieutenant Hannah Bourne was only 3 years old on 9/11. She and her infant sister were at daycare inside the Pentagon when American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the building. Her mother, Dana Bourne, is a retired Air Force Brigadier General. She was working just across the Potomac River at Bolling Air Force Base in D.C. I want to talk about service and I want to talk about that day. But first, General, I have to start. I'm a dad. I can't even imagine your feeling from across the river and you see this explosion at the Pentagon. Your two little girls are there.
Yeah, Jake, it's still a very raw. Emotions come through and a lot of mixed emotions. And yet at the same time, you know, we trained for that. I was a lieutenant colonel, so pretty much 18 years of service. And in that time frame, I thought about three things. First was we had people in the Pentagon, and I had a first sergeant that jumped and went there. So he was our eyes and ears. Called my husband and said, honey, the Pentagon's been hit. He said, I'm on my way. So I could trust that they were going to be hopefully rescued, although we didn't know. And then finally, I actually had to do the mission, which we had been training for, never thought we'd have to. And I had great young men and women who stepped up and surpassed expectations. But yes, it was mind racing and lots of emotions and mixed emotions on that day
And
for many.
thankfully, both of your daughters were okay. Lieutenant, do you remember anything from that day? You were 3.
I was young, so most of my memories are a bit fragmented, where I have bits and pieces that are really vivid and others that are maybe a bit blurry in my time lapse. But I think the common theme across most of my memories is just overwhelming confusion as I struggled to process what was happening. And then on top of that, just sensory overload with the sights and sounds and smells of the day. But I think regardless of how young you were then or how many years have passed, when you have a sensory experience like that, it's a memory that never leaves you.
Yeah, it must have been. I can't even imagine. Confusing for anybody, much less a 3-year-old. So a few days after your husband, who's also a general, we should point out, went on his frantic search, found your daughters. He went back to the daycare to thank workers and to ask them how they were able to move so many of these young kids in the confusion. Some of them were in cribs to this remote area. It turns out there were a lot of unsung heroes that day at the Pentagon.
There were, and the way he retells the story, and this was about 3 days after he went to the daycare and they were all meeting. The care providers were being told the Pentagon daycare was going to close, and so they were kind of getting their pink slips. And he went into the director and said, how in the world did you get 100 plus infants and toddlers to a remote site so beautifully secure with like guards protecting them?
Yeah, John, I
a
think
half
this might be
mile
it.
away? And she said, as soon as the plane hit, there were people. She said a Marine was the first she saw. My husband's a retired Marine, so he likes that part of the story. But several people who came and just helped. They said, how can we help? And they lifted and took them all to a circling of the wagons. And they were in a peaceful spot in the middle of chaos when he found them.
And Lieutenant, I mean, tragically, you had classmates who lost parents that day.
Yes, sir. I think that's one of the things that has always stuck with my sister and I about this story is as much as our story is unique in our proximity to the attacks, it's also not unique because it's not our story, it's a nation's story. And recognizing how blessed our family was that day and also in the 20 years since is something that we keep in mind now in our service and just how we can honor and remember the lives lost and so many families who are changed.
So 6 weeks after 9/11, your family got to celebrate your belated, understandably, 4th birthday. Instead of a Dora the Explorer theme, it was changed to, you insisted on an American flag themed party. You became known as the Little Patriot. Is that what led to you to where you are now as a second lieutenant?
Yes, sir. In a sense, I think so. I think it was less about the flag as a physical object and more that I understood it to be a sense of community. It seemed like in the weeks after 9/11, everywhere you went, there was an American flag on display. And I saw that as a visual indication of people communicating their support for one another and how we were going to come together and grow and heal together. And so that extrinsic focus in supporting others is ultimately what inspired my sister and I now to want to serve in a position that will better others and be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, your other daughter is
She's a
serving.
midshipman at the Naval Academy right now in her 3rd year.
It's incredible. And you don't have.
Let me see if I can find. Let's see here. Found that one. We'll see if this one has any more information here.
You had basically every type of emergency vehicle and the sirens from that. And then on top of that, just a really acrid smell from the burning jet fuel. And to be honest, most of my memories are a little bit fragmented because I was only 3 years old at the time.
Second Lieutenant Hannah Bourne's memories of September 11, 2001 may be fragmented, but the impact lasting. She and her infant sister Heather were inside the Pentagon Daycare Center at the time of the attack.
Service members showed up at the door and started loading infants into cribs and then just carried the cribs like half a mile to the river.
Her mother, now retired Brigadier General Dana Bourne, was serving at Bolling Air Force Base at the time.
You know, our world changed. And it took us a while to realize that, I think, after 9/11, that there's no going back, right? That things have changed.
Also changed the lives of those who served and those left with the trauma of that day. As a child, Hannah drew pictures of what she experienced following the attack and instinctively comforted her sister when her dad brought her to a spot near the Pentagon to try and explain what happened.
Her younger sister, who at 4 months old really was just dealing with, sadness. Who knows where that came from, but she was comforting.
Both daughters now committed to military service themselves. Lieutenant Bourne with the Air Force, Midshipman Heather Bourne currently at the Naval Academy.
The biggest takeaways that my sister and I have had have just been from witnessing firsthand how people show up every day and commit themselves to a larger purpose and do what the nation asks of them, but also do so much more.
Lieutenant Bourne, who is completing a graduate program at Georgetown University this year, hopes to one day fly rescue missions.
What is it about rescue missions?
I don't know, there's probably something innate there about just the gratitude that my sister and I and my family have for the service members who had the awareness to come help rescue us during 9/11 and maybe wanting to give back in a more direct way.
Lieutenant Bourne says every 9/11, she and her sister reflect on what they can do to honor the legacy of the lives lost and the sacrifices made over the past 20 years. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Arlington, Virginia.
Let's see. This might be a little bit more information on that particular event. If I can get it to pull up here. Let me just check it real quick. Bear with me here for just a second. Okay. So this is a little bit more in depth on the story of the daycare situation at the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001. On the day of the attack, I went in search of my wife, Brenda, in the North Parking Lot Raleigh area. She worked in the Pentagon on the opposite side from the crash. Luckily, I found her, but no one was allowed to leave because of the concern another hijacked plane was inbound. We were in the park just east of where the children from the Pentagon Daycare Center had been evacuated. Several of us grabbed the children, some still in cribs that had been relocated there from the daycare, and carried them across the George Washington Parkway, climbing over the guardrail and the highway's median until we reached the banks of the Potomac River. That was as far as we could flee. No inbound plane materialized, but now these 15 or 20 children ages 1 through about 5, were stuck between a river and a highway, while my wife and her coworkers, along with the daycare staff, cared for the children on the narrow strip of land between the highway and river. I and a Virginia ABC special agent spent the remainder of the day procuring diapers, formula, and juice for these children, which we obtained from the Salvation Army Command post in the south parking lot. As a federal agent, I commandeered a commuter bus traveling down the George Washington Parkway to transport the children and the daycare workers to the Virginia Department of Transportation Regional Center on Columbia Pike across from the Navy Annex. The children were brought inside the center. Pizza was ordered for those who weren't infants, and a phone bank was established to contact their parents to let them know where their children were. Several of the children lost parents in the Pentagon crash that day. Okay. Let's see. Might find a couple more, a video or two more here, and then we'll find a good way to sign off here. Let's see.
Within minutes of the impacts, the intense smoke and searing heat from the fires forced people to start jumping from the towers.
And at that point, someone's like, holy shit, look at him jumping, you know? So I remember I look up and I just see people, you know, they're coming out. It felt like it was raining people when I looked, you know, and I clearly remember like seeing two people coming out holding hands.
It wasn't like they jumped. Someone just stepped out, like they were going to step onto a cloud or something.
It was peace, like papers are coming down and they're like floating.
He had a brown suit on. He had brown curly hair. When I got to him, he was in a circle, probably about 8 feet in diameter. And everything that used to be inside of him was now outside of him. That's one of the things that you don't just experience that and you let go of it. It doesn't just go away. I can see that picture in my head right now.
Tony, his close friend Danny Sear, and the rest of Engine 216 are making their way to the South Tower. The bodies are falling on the other side of the road, but one suddenly veers towards them.
So as we're walking, you know, I just hear this whistle come in like a bomb, you know, like I see, you know, the body come flying by and it tags him in the head. I think just the foot caught him. And I remember watching Danny fall back. And I remember, you know, as this person came in and hit, they crashed into a Volkswagen. There was a Volkswagen parked in the corner. It exploded. You know, the person exploded. You know, and so everyone's down on it's everywhere now, you know. Now we're just landing, you know, just gross stuff, you know. Just so like, I remember just looking up and I'm like, Danny. To see him go down was like, oh my God, you know, like this guy can't die. You know, it's Danny Sarr. He's captain of the football team. He's the guy who does everything. He's in charge of every party in the firehouse. You know, he's the pride of the engine. You know, he's what holds us together in the engine. You know, this can't be happening.
The glancing impact of the falling body was enough to kill Danny Sear, the first firefighter to be killed that day.
Okay. And then one other thing we're going to do, we're just going to also recap what happened on this day during Benghazi. So I'm going to pull, let's see. Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to pull this up and let's see. I'm just going to find someone else's words to explain how and what happened. Because I think someone else could probably better explain it than I could. If I can get it to pull up here.
These should suffice.
September 11th. In America, a day of solemn remembrance. In 2012, a day of violence in the Middle East. Demonstrators stormed the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, angry over a low-rent film made in the U.S. that mocks the Prophet Muhammad. In neighboring Libya, Ambassador Christopher Stevens is in Benghazi, a city known for upheaval. Stevens knew Benghazi well. During the civil war that ousted strongman Muammar Gaddafi, he lived there.
He was in at the beginning when Secretary Clinton sent him over there to talk to the rebels and find out who are these people, what are they up to, should we be supporting them?
Stevens' parents were proud that he helped the rebel-led coalition set up a new government.
We were concerned about him and concerned about the work and appreciative of it.
My name is Chris Stevens, and I'm the new U.S. ambassador to Libya.
In May 2012, Stevens was promoted to ambassador. His job? To bring stability to a hot zone.
Gaddafi's weapon stockpiles had been raided, and weapons were just everywhere. So one of the things that the U.S. was interested in doing, and in particular the CIA, was collecting weapons.
That mission brought Stevens to Benghazi on September 11th, when he opened a cultural center and met with officials.
The ambassador, Stevens, had met with a Turkish official in the special mission compound, the consulate there in Benghazi, and everything was quiet for them.
That all changed when darkness fell. At 9:42 p.m., gunfire is heard outside the Benghazi consulate. Then, a loud explosion. Within minutes, dozens of armed militia charged the main gate, setting fire to the barracks, headed straight for the ambassador's residence. By 10 p.m., Ambassador Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, and a security agent run to a safe room.
3 men with guns against 120 with RPGs, machine guns, grenades. They would have been no match.
An alert is sent to the CIA security team at an annex about a mile away. That alert also goes to the State Department and the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli. Using a cell phone, Chris Stevens calls Deputy Mission Chief Gregory Hicks at the embassy.
And he said, "Greg, we're under attack."
A few months before the attack, Stevens briefly cut back on his morning runs after extremists posted his jogging routine online.
I do know from his diary that they found he recognized that there was danger lurking in these places.
Jeff Porter briefed Stevens on the security risks.
The best way to characterize the security environment in Benghazi on September 10th, on September 11th, was that it was unpredictable. There was no law and order. And so while it was probably unlikely that something bad was going to happen, were something bad to happen, it was likely to be catastrophic.
Stevens made repeated requests for more security. Guard booths and gates were added to the Benghazi compound as part of $100,000 in upgrades. But they still didn't have enough people.
Why was manpower so lacking in Benghazi?
We're essentially talking about is a CIA mission in Benghazi, whose purpose was to collect information, to collect weapons potentially, and they may have deliberately wanted to keep a low security profile.
CNN's Drew Griffin reports CIA agents have taken multiple polygraph tests to prevent them from talking about the CIA mission in Benghazi. But we do know that in July, diplomatic security agent Eric Nordstrom asked to have a 16-person special support team stay on as extra security until mid-September. That request went unanswered. Around 10:30 p.m., a fortified door with heavy metal bars keeps the attackers from breaking into the safe room where Smith and Stevens are. Minutes later, the attackers set fire to the villa with diesel fuel.
And literally within minutes, the smoke overwhelmed Stevens and Smith in the safe area.
About the same time, 6 American security agents leave the CIA annex. Former Navy SEAL Tyrone Woods is with them. After a battle, Woods and friendly Libyan fighters regain control of the consulate and start searching for Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith.
They found Sean's body and pulled it out, but he was no longer responsive. They did not find the ambassador.
Back in Washington, word spreads fast about the attack. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, meet with President Obama.
So what happened at the meeting?
Obviously, this is a very unusual event, and it has profound significance for the president. And by this time, of course, everyone's thinking it is 9/11.
At 12:07 a.m. Benghazi time, 6:07 p.m. in Washington, the State Department sends an email to the White House, the Pentagon, and the FBI. It says the Islamic military group Ansar al-Sharia has claimed credit.
If there was any thought that this might have been a spontaneous uprising, well, let's clearly put that to rest.
3 days before September 11th, a local Libyan militia told the U.S. the security situation in Benghazi was quickly deteriorating, warning the Americans to decrease their presence.
There may have been a lack of situational awareness. They may have not been able to identify which of the dozens of violent armed groups in Benghazi posed a threat to the United States.
We have breaking news. An American, we can confirm now, has been killed in Libya tonight.
At about 1 o'clock a.m., an eyewitness captures a man being pulled from the smoke-filled consulate on video. This is the last image of Chris.
We're going to go ahead and cut it there, I think. So we remember the lives lost in Benghazi. Those 4 names are Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, and then 2 CIA operatives, Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods, both former Navy SEALs. And yeah, so it's a hard day for a lot of different reasons. Like I said in the beginning of the podcast, the whole purpose in us doing this today is to make sure that we follow through with the promise that we gave to people on 9/11, that we would not forget not only the sacrifices they made to save people, but the lives lost in those horrific events. And, you know, that too, that God would exact justice in the way that he sees fit. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. Appreciate you all for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.